ed iga forave. Igu bloipo, rusula rusiu, holaka holala, halagu
Welcome back to Film And. I'm here in the offices at the Champlain Wave at Champlain College. It is a dark and dreary, rainy day here in Burlington. It's that kind of day when you're in the afternoon and everything, the cloud cover is so thick, it's just dark, It's just a dark day. In a sense, that kind of works with what we're talking about today, because we are going to be doing a retrospective, in a sense, another running segment we have here on the show, a TWADA, which TWADA, this week, a decade ago, where essentially we talk about a movie that was released this week, a decade ago, and we talk about essentially its reception, its creation, personal thoughts, and kind of the legacy of the movie and how it stands in the current public eye. And I say we, but it's going to be just me today. I think these episodes work better in a conversational context when you have someone to talk to, bounce off of, and, share the film watching experience. But I'll be honest, I couldn't find anyone to watch this with me who could talk about it. So we are just going to be doing pretty much an analysis of the 2011 film Dreamhouse, starring Daniel Craig, Rachel Weisz, Naomi Watts, and directed by Jim Sheridan, Irish filmmaker, playwright, probably most well known for his pretty impressive trilogy of films starring Daniel Day-Lewis, obviously My Left Foot, the Academy Award-winning My Left Foot, and beyond that, In the Name of the Father and The Boxer, which I would argue all three of Daniel Day-Lewis's most classic performances, before he really made his transition to American cinema in probably the last 20 years. So Jim Sheridan, over the years, making these kind of classic films more based around his homeland. He himself transfers to kind of Hollywood, American cinema. You have 2002's In America, a nice foray into American cinema. 2009's Brothers with Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal, with a couple others. And after this, he goes on to 2011's Dreamhouse, the film we are talking about today. And if you haven't seen this one, things to mention before we get into it. Right away, heavy spoilers, the heaviest of spoilers. We're just talking about this entire movie. I'm just going to break down pretty much everything in the movie as it goes. So just be wary. If you haven't seen it, you might want to pause this, go watch it, and come back. Or if you're just interested in what this movie is without having to watch it, I'll be talking about it. So here we go. Essentially, Dreamhouse, 2011 film. When I was going into this, talking about this film, I was looking through all the movies that came out in 2011, and I was thinking, what movies could I do for this week a decade ago? And I had a couple ideas, but I really wanted to do something that just seemed intriguing on surface value that I really had no context with. And when I saw there was a film called Dreamhouse, starring Daniel Craig, Rachel Weisz, Naomi Watts, and then I saw the poster, I was really intrigued. Because it looked like a really fascinating film that was kind of forgotten to time in a sense. And now that I've seen it, I can kind of see why. But essentially, Dreamhouse is a psychological thriller directed by Jim Sheridan from Universal and Morgan Creek Productions. That will be important later. Basic plot. Daniel Craig, accomplished editor, quits his job to be like a writer right off the bat. And to kind of spend time with his family more in their new suburban home. But as things are revealed little by little, there is much more to Daniel Craig's character than we realize when he is confronted with a mysterious stranger who seems to be threatening his family and murdered the family that lived in the house before them. And really the first thing you kind of notice is a very, very weird aspect ratio. I mean, this thing is the widest of screens. We're talking like Lawrence of Arabia levels of widescreen. It's really insane. And it is just the 2.35 by 1 widescreen aspect ratio. But watching this on my laptop, it might have just been, the crop of my laptop. But man, this thing really feels like the tops and the bottoms of every shot is kind of cut out. Now, obviously, it's framed correctly. It doesn't seem inherently wrong with like the production. But it does make for a very weird experience, a very cloistered experience where I feel like I'm just missing out on way more of the movie, I guess. I don't know. It's very interesting. It's just a thin rectangle of a movie. And yeah, I'll be honest, I was going into this with really only one expectation, that this was a horror movie. Which is why it feels like it kind of makes sense to talk about on such a dreary, dark, ominous day. It's a horror movie. I saw an interesting cast, and then I saw the poster. This creepy green wallpaper and these two young girls in the same patterned clothes holding hands. I think you see that, and I think anyone can safely guess that this is a horror movie. But as I found out by looking it up 10 minutes in, this is actually a mystery thriller, a psychological thriller. So I really needed to kind of reorient my perspective going into it, because the way this film starts off is it starts off like a slightly better made Hallmark movie, maybe with a bigger budget. I don't know. It's shot kind of this soft and warm family feeling, which felt like tonally weird, trying to start off this, what I thought was a horror movie. But I started to actually realize later on that this would be very intentional in giving the audience a different kind of aesthetic and then kind of revealing what the true reality of the situation is. So essentially, the story goes along. Daniel Craig quits his job at generic skyscraper office building because he wants to spend time writing his book, and he goes off to spend more time with his family in the suburbs. His wife, Rachel Weisz, and his 2 daughters, and they're just living this kind of idyllic life, a new house, they're happy, they're in love, and it's just a very nice dynamic until strange things start to happen. The daughters see someone outside their window.
He was right there.
What did he look like, baby?
She said he had a big head, and it was fuzzy.
Fuzzy? Sweetie, do you mean a pretend person? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, wait a minute. I know what you saw. Look, you saw the twigs at the bottom of the garden. It looks like a man, see?
No, he was right there.
Wait a minute. Look at this.
And
Watch. Look at the window.
Daniel Craig doesn't pay much mind to it.
See? See, it was your own reflection. When Trish turned on
And
the
despite
light.
this idyllic kind of suburban life they've found for themselves, it does feel like there's this eerie sense of something being off. And I think that kind of comes off first with just the family across the street. So basically, one morning, the family across the street, which you learn is 2 divorced parents and their daughter, they enter the scene. And I'll be honest, it's a pretty basic take on what you can call a divorced family. The daughter is a child of divorce in a 2000s movie, so she immediately has long dark hair, dark eyeliner, and a hoodie. The dad is a controlling hothead, skeptical of any man who looks at his ex-wife, and he can't really gain full custody of his daughter, which is something he's struggling with, and we really don't want him to either. And his generic skyscraper business job just came back with some quarterly figures, which are not what they wanted. It's at this point you get to this scene and you kind of see these characters interacting with Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz's family, where I'm kind of like, this isn't the greatest screenplay for dialogue. It doesn't exactly go above and beyond to subtextually give you a sense of these characters. So it's something you kind of have to adjust to and get ready, strap in for early on in this movie. And essentially you can feel that there's this connection between the divorced mom, Naomi Watts' character, with Daniel Craig, but you don't really know why at first. She has this kind of knowing to her, and Daniel Craig's just like, "Hi, I'm Daniel Craig. I'm your nice British neighbor." And the plot kind of starts off that night after meeting their neighbors. And then the next morning, Daniel Craig sees footsteps outside his window. Ooh, the mystery begins, essentially. Who is this person that's stalking their house? That night, Daniel Craig investigates his house and finds a bunch of generic first wave punk looking kids, just the hair, the black clothes, and a bunch of rings and eyeliner. And they're all just kind of having a little party in his basement, like a candle ceremony ritual thing. And he crashes it, he chases them out, and he catches one. And he confronts her about what they're doing in his basement. And then, they leave while laughing and saying, "Oh, he's back, oh no." And all I can say is a lot of this often feels very boilerplate. All of it. The characters, the dialogue, the setting, the portrayal of these kind of archetypal characters, the punk teens in the neighborhood and the divorced parents where the dad is a hothead and the wife is just kind of a longing, somber character for the male lead to like kind of have a thing with. And yeah, it really starts to take you out of the movie very quickly. But as the movie progresses, essentially, the murderer of the previous family closes in and tensions rise. There's creepy backwriting on the walls. And we learn that this individual, Peter Ward, killed his family before Daniel Craig and his family moved in. For some reason has some attachment to the house and might be coming back to kill Daniel Craig's family. So you really don't know. Daniel Craig starts to investigate Peter Ward. Like, who is this guy? Let me find him. After he killed his family, he was brought to a mental institution, and he finds his room only to find that Peter Ward is gone. And he ends up talking to a psychologist there about, like, who is this guy? I'm pretty sure he's gonna, like, try and kill my family. He killed his family in the same house. And then the psychologist lays some crazy stuff on Daniel Craig, and it is revealed that Daniel Craig's character is Peter Ward. And this does kind of feel like a good midpoint to stop, kind of take a quick PSA break, and just discuss the end of the movie, and then eventually kind of my final thoughts on it.
Running late to class but still need that morning caffeine or hot breakfast to start your day out right? Download the Bite app by Sodexo and place your custom order for fast, easy pickup at Zyme. Open 8:30 a.m. to 3 o'clock p.m. Mondays through Fridays.
All right, well, hey, welcome back. We're talking about 2011's The Dream House. And man, oh man, what a movie. At this point in the movie, Daniel Craig has been told that he is, in fact, Peter Ward, the man who is trying to kill his family. And at this point, I'll say it, I was officially lost. I was confused. I was trying to be like, what's happening? And this movie, it started out so, like, painfully generic, but man, now I'm thinking, like, I'm looking back, and that was very intentional. Because the entire second half of the film is Daniel Craig realizing that all this, like, kind of him going back to the house, like, his whole family scene is just his memories of his family that he apparently killed, And after he killed them, he had a mental break, essentially. And it's him trying to basically retrace his steps because he's been stuck in this giant psychosis of pretending he's someone else. He's convinced himself he's this Will Attenton. So, okay, that's another thing. So, essentially what they do is, in the screenplay, this Peter Ward character had, like, a bracelet where it said WL-81010 as just kind of like his designation in the mental institution. And he was so stricken with grief with killing his family or thinking he killed his family that he decided he couldn't be Peter Ward anymore and he wanted to be something else. So he would take the WL-81010 and he made his name Will Attenton, which was like, that could have been cool. It just kind of came off really goofy, honestly. It was like, wait, my name isn't Will Attenton. And the psychologist is like, no, look at your bracelet. That's just WL810. And I'm like, okay, all right. But yeah, basically, you know, everything we'd seen before this was a memory, and it's just kind of Daniel Craig realizing he's overcoming the loss of his family by his hand. And then we realize that he starts to go back and try and get answers of his past life. He can't remember who he was. So he goes to Naomi Watts, who apparently was his neighbor back then when he killed his family. He was like, what happened? And we ought to believe that Naomi Watts doesn't think that he killed his family. She knew Peter Ward before this. And she truly feels like he isn't capable of killing his wife and his kids. That doesn't seem right. So as it goes on, you know, they start to investigate and understand what's going on. And then it is revealed, well, another kind of an issue. It's revealed through the ghost memories of Daniel Craig's family that it was not, in fact, Daniel Craig who killed his family. It is, in fact, a robber, or kind of like it was actually a hitman who was hired by the stepdad to kill his ex-wife so he could get full custody of his daughter, but they went to the wrong house. So instead of going on the right side of the street, they go to the left side of the street, seeing Rachel Weisz's character out on the porch, thinking, oh, that's his wife. And the stepdad is on the phone with the hitman being like, hey, yeah, you see my wife outside? That must be my wife. And he goes to the house and he realizes there's 2 more daughters, and Daniel Craig comes down and it's just an entire mess. And the hitman ends up killing his wife and his 2 daughters and eventually shooting Peter Ward in the head. And basically the crime scene looks as if Peter Ward killed his family and the hitman got away. So he goes crazy because he was shot in the head and he doesn't really remember what happened. And eventually when this crazy stepdad finds them and realizes that they know what he did and they know that the hitman is coming back to like finish the job in a sense, Daniel Craig and Naomi Watts team up and take down the stepdad and the hitman, and then the house burns down and Daniel Craig has a nice moment with his ghost memory family saying goodbye as the house is burning down. And then the ending, the very ending of the movie is Daniel Craig back in the city where he had his generic skyscraper job, and he walks by a new best-selling novel that has been put up in the window of some big city bookstore entitled Dream House by Peter Ward, where essentially, I guess, he was an editor turned writer, and this is the book he decided to write as sort of an epilogue to this main story. He decided to write this story of his life. And that's the movie. When it comes to psychological thrillers, mystery thrillers, this definitely is on the lower end of that. And I'll be honest, I really can't blame Jim Sheridan for this. It's public record, essentially, that Jim Sheridan had a lot of tension with Morgan Creek Productions. They continuously fought over the shape of the script, the production of the movie, and after Sheridan reshot some scenes because they didn't go down well with test audiences, Morgan Creek took the film away from Sheridan and recut it themselves. And as a result, they created a trailer that didn't make sense, and it also basically revealed the entire twist of the movie. And, well, when the movie was released September 30th, 2011, which is, well, upon the airing of this, it'll be yesterday. It's a couple days in advance right now. Critics panned it. They didn't get any pre-screenings, and when they saw it, no one liked it, seeing Morgan Creek's edit of it. And Jim Sheridan actually requested that he have his name taken off the movie because it was so different from his kind of initial plan for it. And Daniel Craig has actually said, when he's been asked about the movie, he says, the movie didn't turn out great, but I met my wife. Fair trade. Which is kind of crazy because Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz met on this set and started dating. And several months later, their relationship was announced and they were married in a discreet ceremony. And they're still together to this day. So when I look back at the legacy of this film, it truly feels like the legacy comes in the relationship that Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz were able to develop while on the set of this film. And to be honest, yeah, the movie didn't turn out great. And it's sometimes hard to tell whether that's the issue of, well, it could be anything, you know, the mismanagement of the production, just the lack of cohesion and communication between Jim Sheridan and Morgan Creek Productions. But overall, the movie ended up kind of a mess, you know? But I can appreciate that a lot of the things I didn't like in the beginning were kind of explained to be intentional. This kind of Hallmark movie aesthetic that it was gathering was really ticking me off, but it's because it was a memory. It was kind of like this sunshiny fake memory that Daniel Craig was giving himself, and that's why it felt like that. And I think that's a pretty ingenious way, because it really puts the audience like just in that story. And then when it rips that away and you have this much more bleak narrative of Daniel Craig realizing that, well, eventually he didn't kill his family, but thinking that he killed his family and he's just going through this psychosis, I think it's a really cool turn for the audience. And it's a shame that the movie can't, you know, develop that better, or at least portray it better than it did. Because 10 years later, who's talking about this movie? You know, this is 1 year before Skyfall. You know, you've already had 2 pretty solid Bond films, and this is like a quick detour for Daniel Craig. And it's the same kind of just like a pit stop for Rachel Weisz, who has continued to have like these really cool performances throughout her career, you know, all the way from Mummy to more recently Black Widow. You know, she's had a pretty successful, or at least consistent acting career. And having these two just kind of come in here together, it does kind of feel like just kind of like an aside to more major projects that they might have been working on and considering at the time. But yeah, it's, you know, the reveal of like Daniel Craig not killing his family, it's kind of cool, it's redemptive, and it is interesting. And I'll be honest, a lesser movie would have had less twists and turns. I'll say that. And I can respect this movie for kind of keeping you on your toes. But even with this reveal of, oh, I didn't kill my family, that comes 15 minutes before the ending, it does feel like at the end of the day, this movie drags. It's slow, it's semi-incoherent, it feels very just untranslatable at times. Like, you can tell that there's this confusion of what the movie is trying to depict. And that can really make it drag, because the damn thing's only 92 minutes. You know, it's a solid hour and a half, and beyond that, it still feels very long, like over 2 hours long. And because you're just kind of sitting there being like, okay, what's happening, you know? And it has these kind of like moments that you kind of think, oh, is this kind of doing like a jump scary horror thing, but a bit more artsy, when you actually have like that moment of the 2 girls with the like wallpaper pattern, which is kind of like the still they took for the poster, but like the house is crumbling because like Daniel Craig is remembering that he killed his family or whatever, in this kind of like artsy dream sequence that he's having. And it has these moments of like, oh, it's kind of like this creepy horror thriller thing, but it's also just like a mystery, and it's also like a family drama. And it does feel like that this movie, I think, has a very definitive language, but through the edit and through the presentation of what was filmed and what was made, it doesn't come through at all. It doesn't translate for the audience in any meaningful way. And I think this is like, I'm happy I picked this movie, you know? Out of all the movies I could have picked from 2011, Contagion, Super 8, Take Shelter, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Descendants, Moneyball, Melancholia, The Lincoln Lawyer, even The Thing remake. I could have talked about any of these, but, you know, I decided to pick this movie because it does feel like such a good example of a specific subgenre of film that, you know, doesn't really get talked about. It doesn't really get its time in the sun. And those are films that aren't bad enough to be fun and aren't good enough to be remembered. You know, middling performances of cinema where the actors and the director can look back and be like, that wasn't all best work. In this case, it is kind of this fault of the production company, taking it away from the director, doing an edit, and just kind of mangling the entire concept for what they think would be a marketable product. And I think there's plenty of movies that kind of fall under this, that fall prey to this kind of idea of just pumping out a marketable product or something. And this is what I found this film made me consider when I was looking at it, you know, because it is hard. I mean, you know, I'm a film major. I've been in the film atmosphere for years now, and I do kind of look at it sometimes not just from a perspective of artistry, but also of industry, and looking how this film was created, why it was made the way it was, and how it was given to us. And a decade later, Dreamhouse has faded into obscurity. And on the surface level, yeah, deservedly so. It's a pretty middling movie. Like, it's not interesting, new, inventive, exciting. It's really none of that. And it is kind of a shame that Jim Sheridan has this on his record book, because I think Jim Sheridan has made some amazing films in the past, especially his like kind of trilogy with Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, those will always stand as really cool films. And you have Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz and even Naomi Watts, all three people with pretty interesting careers. And the fact that you have the director and actors creatively collaborating on a project like this and it falling kind of pretty flat, I think the only way I see myself coming back to this, being intrigued in this, being like justifying what this film was, is to kind of hold it up as an example of films that just kind of get munched up in the industry gears. And you know, we're coming down to the end of this half an hour here, and I'm looking out the window at the Champlain Wave Studios, just considering what a bleak, dreary day it is, and what a bleak, dreary thought it is to consider these movies that, like, from any genuine standpoint, kind of don't deserve the light of day. But I do feel like a movie like this, like any movie, for me, it will always stand as a placeholder of considering a movie that just, as I said, isn't bad enough to be fun, isn't good enough to be remembered. Especially when considering the psychological thriller lens it's put under when you're trying to make a film that has like psychological themes and is like kind of a mystery, because it is about the presentation and the reveal and what you do with that reveal that informs the climax that actually makes these movies good, that elevates them, you know? Like Zodiac, I think, is a good example of a psychological thriller that does it really well. And then you have Dreamhouse. And the last thing I want to do is come on here and bash Dreamhouse. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty unremarkable film. And the best way I can justify talking about it for a half an hour is to kind of hold up the light to this film and consider, why did it turn out the way it is? Which is, I think, when you're watching movies, that is a great question to ask. Whether it's your favorite movie, just a real trash movie, you look at these and ask yourself, why did this turn out the way it is? And that's one of those inherent questions I love asking as just a lover of film. I think it really allows me to like sit in and be like, wow, you know? And that's about all the time we have, folks. If you've seen 2011's Dreamhouse, if you remember it at all from 10 years ago, if it's one of your favorites, if it's one of your least favorites, let us know here at the Film and channel, you know? I mean, if you're listening to this on YouTube, and of course I will have this up on the Film and Letterboxd list of films we talk about under my Letterboxd, DA_N. Thank you so much for listening. We have some really fun episodes coming up. Well, it's going to be a very beefy topic. I'm talking about many movies, but I think it'll be worth it in just kind of a rapid fire succession, just talking about these movies and reacting essentially. But yeah, as always, thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from me next week.